Innocent twins get the death penalty, right there in the courtroom, broadcast for all to see. Two young black girls accused of a murder they didn't commit, sentenced to die by a judge who never looked them in the eye, with no one left to save them, until the courtroom doors swing open. The U.S. Attorney General walks in. Why did he vanish from their lives? And how far will he go to save the daughters he never knew he had? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The mahogany doors of courtroom 3A seemed to swallow all hope as Zara and Zena Mitchell shuffled inside, their ankle chains clicking against the polished floor like tiny bells announcing their doom. The courthouse's ancient air conditioning hummed overhead, barely cutting through the thick Charleston summer heat that pressed down on the packed gallery like an invisible weight. Outside, cicadas sang their endless summer song, oblivious to the human drama unfolding within these walls. Zara's ill-fitting navy blazer scratched at her neck, the stiff fabric feeling like sandpaper against her skin. The price tag was still tucked inside, $12.99 from the Goodwill on Meeting Street. She tugged at the collar, trying to find relief that wouldn't come. She glanced at Zena, who wore its twin, the shoulders too wide and sleeves too short. Their public defender, Ron Hensley, had insisted they look presentable for sentencing, though he'd spent more time checking his phone than preparing their defense over the past 3 months. He hadn't even bothered to remove the tags. Camera lights blazed from every corner, turning the wood-paneled walls into mirrors that reflected their fear back at them. Reporters scribbled in notepads, their pens moving like hungry insects devouring the twins' misfortune. The scratch of pen on paper seemed deafening to Zara's ears. In the front row, Senator Thomas Whitmore sat with perfect posture, his silver hair catching the light like a halo that mocked true goodness. His expression reminded Zara of a cat who'd cornered its prey, satisfied and coldly patient. He adjusted his gold cufflinks, the flash of metal like a wink at their suffering. Judge Carlton Knox entered, his black robes flowing behind him like dark wings of some judicial predator. The bailiffs' "all rise" boomed through the room, echoing off the walls. Zara's legs shook as she stood, knees threatening to buckle beneath her. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Under the table, Zena's fingers found hers, squeezing tight, their lifelong signal that they weren't alone. A silent promise they'd kept since childhood. Knox settled into his chair with practiced importance, adjusting his reading glasses with manicured fingers that had never known real work. He cleared his throat, a sound like gravel underfoot. His voice carried no warmth as he began the proceedings, dry as autumn leaves. In the matter of the state versus Zara and Zena Mitchell, the words washed over Zara like cold water from a winter stream. She thought of their mother's empty bedroom at home, still smelling faintly of lavender and chemotherapy, the indentation of her head still visible on the pillow, the faded quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed, waiting for an owner who would never return. 6 months gone, and the pain still felt fresh, a wound that refused to scab over. For the crime of first-degree murder of Blake Whitmore, Knox continued, not bothering to hide the satisfaction in his tone, I sentence you both to death by lethal injection. The gallery erupted like a disturbed beehive. Gasps mixed with scattered applause from the Whitmore side. Camera shutters clicked like summer crickets in a feeding frenzy. A woman sobbed loudly, though Zara couldn't tell if it was from grief or relief. Ron Hensley didn't even look up from his phone, already mentally moving on to his next case, his disinterest a final betrayal. Zara felt oddly calm, as if floating outside her body, watching herself from the ceiling tiles above. Beside her, Zena sat perfectly still, her face a mask of stone chiseled by years of disappointment. A single vein pulsed at her temple, the only sign of life. They'd learned young that tears didn't change anything in a world that had decided their worth before they were born. Senator Whitmore's smile grew wider, revealing teeth too perfect to be real. He nodded to Judge Knox, who was already gathering his papers, clearly done with them like yesterday's trash. Their lives dismissed with the tap of a gavel, their futures erased with the stroke of a pen. The guards approached with keys ready, their heavy footsteps marking the rhythm of the twins' remaining days. Metal scraped against metal as they prepared to unshackle the twins for transfer. Zara leaned close to her sister, her whisper barely a breath. "They're going to kill us." Zena's eyes remained fixed ahead, her voice as cold as Judge Knox's heart. "We're already ghosts." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on faces that had already forgotten them. Two black girls from the wrong side of town, with no one left to mourn them but each other. The cameras kept rolling, hungry for their pain, while justice turned its back once again, blind to truth but never to color or class. In the back of the courtroom, a clock ticked steadily onward, indifferent to the lives it measured away. The holding cell's fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete walls. Zara and Zena Mitchell sat pressed together on the cold metal bench, their borrowed suits already wrinkled from the long morning in court. The distant sound of doors opening and closing echoed through the corridors, but neither twin spoke. They didn't need to. 18 years of shared existence had taught them how to read each other's silence. Their linked hands told the whole story: fear, uncertainty, and a fierce determination to face whatever came next. Zara's mind drifted back to the Whitmore estate, where everything had started to unravel. The chandeliers had always been the worst part of their cleaning duties, crystal prisms that caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the marble floors they'd spent hours polishing. She remembered watching Zena balance on the stepladder, carefully wiping each delicate piece, her face set in concentration as she reached for the highest crystals. The memory was both beautiful and painful now, tainted by everything that had followed. "Watch this, ladies," Blake Whitmore had called out one afternoon, sliding across the freshly polished floor in his socks. His laughter bounced off the vaulted ceiling as he nearly crashed into an antique vase. "Come on, Zena, take a break, have some fun with me." His voice carried that familiar edge, half playful, half demanding, that made Zara's skin crawl and her stomach knot with anxiety. Zena had simply kept working, her jaw tight. "No thanks, Mr. Whitmore." Her knuckles had whitened around the cleaning cloth, betraying the tension she was trying to hide. "Mr. Whitmore? That's my father. I'm Blake to you." He'd moved closer to the ladder, looking up at her with that entitled smile he always wore. "You know, you're pretty cute when you're being all professional." His eyes had lingered too long, making Zara want to pull her sister away and shield her from his predatory gaze. "I need to finish this section," Zena had replied flatly, turning her back to him. The message was clear, but Blake had only smirked and sauntered away, his designer shoes leaving fresh marks on their freshly cleaned floor. The memory shifted to another day. Zena ducking behind a hedge in the garden after hearing raised voices from the pool house. Through the windows, she'd seen Blake, his face red with anger, squaring off against another boy about their age. Blake had grabbed the front of the boy's shirt, shoving him hard against the wall. Their words were muffled, but the violence in Blake's movements had been clear enough. Zena had slipped away unnoticed, but the image stayed with her. Blake's face twisted with rage, so different from his carefully maintained charm that fooled everyone else. Zara's memory was sharper, more painful. The guest house door had been unlocked that morning. The copper smell hit her first, metallic and wrong, filling her nostrils and making her gag. Then she saw him. Blake's body sprawled across the imported rug, the back of his head a mess of matted hair and blood. Her scream had torn from her throat before she could stop it, bringing the household running. In seconds, their world had collapsed around them like a house of cards. In the holding cell, Zena broke their silence. "I should have told them about the boy." Her voice was barely above a whisper, rough from hours of disuse. Her eyes held a haunted look that Zara recognized all too well. The burden of secrets kept too long. Zara shook her head slowly, her shoulders sagging with the weight of their situation. They never would have listened. The truth of it sat heavy between them. They were the help, the cleaning girls, the daughters of a housekeeper. Their words had meant nothing against the weight of the Whitmore name and fortune, against generations of privilege and power. A guard's voice cut through their shared memories. "Bring the prisoners up for transfer." The sisters turned to each other, their identical faces reflecting the same mix of emotions, fear swimming beneath resignation, and somewhere deeper, a spark of defiance that refused to die. Whatever happened next, They would face it together, as they always had, bound by blood and shared experience in a world that had never given them a fair chance. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Deputies Ford and Klein guided Zara and Zena toward the waiting transport van. The twins' handcuffs clinked softly with each step, a metallic counterpoint to the shouting reporters and clicking cameras that surrounded them like hungry wolves closing in for the kill. The air was thick with tension and the acrid smell of exhaust from idling news vans. "Miss Mitchell, how do you feel about the death sentence?" "Zena, Zara, look this way. Do you maintain your innocence?" The questions blurred together into a wall of noise that pounded against Zara's ears. She kept her eyes down, focused on putting one foot in front of the other on the worn concrete steps. Each step felt like moving through molasses, her legs trembling with exhaustion after the grueling day in court. Beside her, Zena's jaw was set tight, her shoulders rigid under the ill-fitting suit jacket that hung loosely on her frame. A muscle twitched in her sister's cheek, betraying the anger Zara knew was boiling beneath the surface. Suddenly, the growl of powerful engines cut through the chaos like a knife. A fleet of black SUVs with tinted windows roared up to the curb, their government plates gleaming in the slanting sunlight. The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in fresh excitement as the lead vehicle's door swung open with purpose. The air crackled with anticipation. Attorney General Elijah Warren emerged, his tall frame unfolding gracefully from the SUV. His presence commanded immediate attention, from his perfectly tailored suit that spoke of power to his purposeful stride that brooked no argument. Silver threads at his temples caught the light as cameras flashed frantically. He strode toward the courthouse steps, a thick manila folder clutched in one hand, his expression unreadable, but determined. The very air seemed to part before him. That's the Attorney General," Deputy Ford muttered, his grip on Zara's arm loosening slightly in surprise. His voice held a note of awe that Zara had never heard from him before. She could feel the deputy's hand trembling against her sleeve. The reporters surged forward like a tide, shoving microphones toward Warren, but he moved through them like they were water, his focus laser-sharp. The courthouse security guards stepped forward uncertainly, caught between protocol and the sheer authority radiating from the nation's top lawyer who clearly wasn't expected. Their hands hovered near their weapons, more from habit than any real threat. Zara felt her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might bruise. Her mouth went dry as paper. She knew his face from TV news clips, but seeing him here, now, made no sense at all. Beside her, Zena had gone completely still, her eyes wide with disbelief, the usual defiance momentarily replaced by shock. Her sister's fingers brushed against hers, seeking connection. Warren reached the bottom of the steps and held up the folder, his voice carrying clearly across the courthouse plaza without him having to shout. "I have emergency federal documentation that needs immediate attention. I must speak with Judge Knox right away." The folder's edges were crisp and precise, like everything else about him. The guards exchanged glances, uncertainty written across their faces. Then one spoke into his radio, words hushed and urgent. Static crackled in response. Warren continued up the steps until he stood directly in front of the twins. His dark eyes met theirs, and for a moment something raw and emotional flickered across his composed features, something that looked almost like recognition. The scent of his expensive cologne mingled with the leather of his briefcase. Then he turned to face the wall of cameras, his voice ringing with authority that silenced even the most persistent reporters. "These girls are mine, and they are innocent." His words hung in the air like a promise, heavy with meaning and the weight of justice long delayed. The tension in courtroom 4A was thick enough to cut with a knife. Judge Carlton Knox's fingers drummed an irritated rhythm on his mahogany bench as he glared down at Attorney General Elijah Warren. The federal marshals flanking Warren stood like stone sentinels, their presence a clear message that this was now a federal matter. Their crisp uniforms and stern expressions added weight to every word Warren spoke. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across Knox's face, deepening the lines of frustration etched around his mouth. "Your Honor," Warren's deep voice carried effortlessly through the half-filled courtroom, "I have evidence that will fundamentally change the nature of this case." His words hung in the air, heavy with promise and threat. A hushed anticipation fell over the spectators, who leaned forward in their seats. Knox's lip curled in undisguised contempt. "The verdict has already been delivered, Mr. Warren. Even your position doesn't grant you the authority to—" "I am these girls' biological father," Warren interrupted, his words landing like thunderclaps in the sudden silence. The declaration echoed off the wood-paneled walls, seeming to reverberate through the very foundations of the courthouse. Reporters' pens froze mid-scratch. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the historic moment. In their chairs, Zara and Zena sat perfectly still, their expressions a mirror of shock and confusion. Zara's mouth fell slightly open, her breath catching in her throat while Zena's eyes narrowed in disbelief, her jaw clenching tight enough to make a muscle jump in her cheek. Warren pulled out a thick manila envelope with steady hands. "I have DNA confirmation, sworn affidavits, and supporting documentation. Their mother, Naomi Mitchell, and I met in college. We were in love." His voice softened slightly, carrying a hint of old pain. "But our relationship drew threats, violence. When she discovered she was pregnant, she made the choice to protect our daughters by keeping my identity secret." He glanced briefly toward the twins, his eyes filled with 18 years of unspoken regret. "This is preposterous," Knox spat, his face reddening beneath his carefully maintained composure. "You expect us to believe—" "I expect you to follow federal law," Warren cut in smoothly, nodding to one of the marshals who stepped forward with additional paperwork. "This injunction immediately halts both the transfer and execution orders. Furthermore, there is clear evidence of judicial misconduct in this case that demands immediate review." The marshal placed the documents on the bench with deliberate precision. Whispers rippled through the press gallery like wind through tall grass. Several reporters slipped out, phones already pressed to their ears, eager to break the story that would dominate headlines by morning. The courtroom's tension crackled like static electricity before a storm. Zara's eyes were wide, fixed on Warren's face, searching for traces of herself in his features, the shape of his eyes, the curve of his jaw. Beside her, Zena's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white with pressure. A single tear balanced precariously on her lower lash, refusing to fall. Knox snatched the papers, scanning them with growing fury. His knuckles whitened around the edges of the documents as the full weight of the situation became clear. The law was clear. He had no choice but to comply, at least for now. A vein pulsed visibly at his temple. "Fine," he growled, each word dripping with venom. "The execution and transfer are temporarily stayed pending federal review." He leaned forward, locking eyes with Warren. "This isn't over, Warren. You've just made enemies you can't afford." The threat lingered in the air between them, almost tangible. Warren met his gaze steadily, unflinching in the face of the judge's barely contained rage. Behind him, the twins remained frozen, their world suddenly turned upside down by the revelation of a father they never knew existed, and whose appearance might just save their lives. The clock on the wall ticked steadily forward, marking the first moments of their drastically altered future. The conference room's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Elijah Warren's face as he waited. His hands were clasped tightly on the metal table, betraying the tension beneath his composed exterior. The room felt smaller with each passing minute, the bare walls closing in like the weight of his past decisions. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the chill of the air conditioning. When the heavy door creaked open, his heart skipped. The guards led Zara and Zena in, their shackles clinking with each step, a sound that pierced Elijah's soul. Both girls kept their eyes fixed on the floor, their shoulders rigid with distrust. They sat down without a word, the metal chairs scraping against concrete, echoing in the sterile space. The distance between them felt like miles, though only a table separated father from daughters. "Thank you," Elijah said softly to the guards, who positioned themselves by the door, faces impassive. He looked at his daughters, really looked at them, seeing traces of Naomi in their features, mixed with his own. The curve of Zara's cheek, the set of Zena's jaw, living reminders of what he'd lost. His throat tightened at the sight of them, Young women now, strangers he should have known from birth. 3 weeks ago, he began, his voice gentle but steady. A probate clerk found a sealed file when processing your mother's death certificate. That's how I learned about you both. He paused, watching their faces for any reaction, any opening. I never knew Naomi was pregnant. She never told me. Not once. His fingers twitched with the urge to reach across the table toward them, but he held back. Zena's harsh laugh cut through the air like a knife. So now you care? Her eyes finally met his, blazing with 18 years of anger and abandonment. The intensity of her gaze made him flinch. Her hands clenched into fists on the table, knuckles white with tension. I always cared about your mother, Elijah said, pain evident in his voice. But back then, things were different, dangerous. He took a deep breath, memories flooding back. When our relationship became public, the threats started. First phone calls, then letters. One night, someone threw a Molotov cocktail through my apartment window. I woke up choking on smoke. The memory still haunted him, the heat, the panic, the realization that loving Naomi had put them both in danger. Zara's head lifted slightly, her expression cautious but attentive. Unlike her sister, she seemed to be listening, weighing each word. Her quiet assessment felt more penetrating than Zena's open hostility. Senior political figures, people with real power, told me to leave the state or lose everything I'd worked for. Elijah's hands tightened until his knuckles turned white. I made the wrong choice. I left Charleston. But the moment I found out about you both, I dropped everything, no hesitation, not a second thought. His voice cracked on the last words, revealing the raw regret he carried. Must be nice, Zena spat, having the power to sweep in and play hero now that it's convenient. Each word dripped with bitterness. Her eyes, so like her mother's, narrowed with accusation. Zena, he started. Save it, she cut him off. Where were you when Mom got sick? When we were cleaning houses to pay rent? When they arrested us for something we didn't even do? She leaned forward, each question landing like a blow. Zara remained silent, but her eyes never left Elijah's face, studying him as if searching for truth beneath the surface of his words. Her stillness spoke volumes, a sharp contrast to her sister's fire. Please. Elijah leaned forward, his voice thick with emotion. Let me help now. Let me try to make this right. I know I can't give back those years, but I'm here now. He spread his hands in a gesture of openness, of offering. The door opened with a metallic clang and the guard stepped forward. Time was up. Zena stood immediately, her chair scraping back against the floor. She fixed Elijah with a cold stare. You're 18 years too late. Without another word, she turned and walked out, back straight with defiance, chains rattling with each determined step. Zara rose more slowly. For just a moment she hesitated, meeting his gaze. Something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty, perhaps a question, maybe even the faintest spark of hope. Then she too was gone, leaving Elijah alone with the buzzing lights and his regrets, the echo of their footsteps fading down the corridor. He sat motionless, staring at the empty chairs where his daughters had been, wondering if he'd just lost them for good. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the private airstrip as a black SUV rolled to a stop on the tarmac. The air was thick with humidity, typical for a Charleston summer, making clothes stick to skin and breathing feel like work. Beads of sweat gathered at temples despite the early hour. 2 federal marshals stepped out first, scanning the area with practiced efficiency before opening the rear doors, their hands resting near their holstered weapons, eyes constantly moving behind dark sunglasses. Zara emerged slowly, her second-hand suit wrinkled from the night in custody, the fabric hanging loosely on her slender frame. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from a sleepless night. Zena followed, her jaw set in a hard line, eyes narrowed against the harsh sunlight, fingers fidgeting nervously at her sides. Their handcuffs had been removed, but invisible chains of mistrust still bound them like shackles no key could unlock. The sisters exchanged a brief glance, a wordless communication born of years together. Elijah Warren walked several paces behind, his tall frame casting a long shadow that nearly reached his daughters. a physical reminder of his presence in their lives after years of absence. His shoulders carried tension, his steps measured and careful. The private jet gleamed white against the pale morning sky, pristine and imposing. Its engines hummed quietly, ready for takeoff. A gentle vibration felt through the tarmac. Sunlight glinted off the polished metal, almost blinding. A flight attendant stood at the bottom of the stairs, her professional smile unwavering despite the tension in the air that was almost thick enough to touch. Her perfectly pressed uniform seemed out of place amid their disheveled appearance. "This way, please," she gestured, stepping aside as the marshals escorted the twins up the stairs, their hands hovering near the girls' elbows without actually touching them, ready to steady or restrain if necessary. Inside, the jet's interior was spotless and modern, all cream leather and polished wood that spoke of wealth and privilege. The faint scent of leather and expensive cologne hung in the air. But it felt cold, institutional somehow, like an expensive prison. Zara and Xena sat together, their shoulders touching, a habit formed over years of seeking comfort in each other when no one else offered any. Their fingers occasionally brushed, reassuring one another without words. Elijah took a seat across the aisle, giving them space while keeping them in sight, his eyes never straying far from their faces, studying features he'd missed watching grow. As the jet taxied for takeoff, Elijah cleared his throat. "We're heading to Northern Virginia," he explained, his deep voice careful and measured, like someone approaching a wounded animal. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "I have a secure estate there. You'll be under constant protection." The twins didn't respond. Xena turned to stare out the window, her reflection in the glass as hard as stone, her fingers curled tightly around the armrest until her knuckles whitened. The engines roared louder as they lifted into the sky, leaving Charleston, and everything they'd ever known, behind in a blur of green and blue. The pressure of takeoff pushed them back into their seats, a physical manifestation of the forces pulling them away from their past. Minutes stretched into hours of uncomfortable silence. The flight attendant offered drinks and snacks that went untouched, retreating to the galley after each polite refusal, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The hum of the engines became white noise, punctuating the unspoken tension. Finally, Zara broke the heavy silence, her voice barely above a whisper, cracking slightly from disuse. "Why are you doing all this?" Elijah leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense, lines deepening around his mouth. A muscle in his jaw twitched before he answered. "Because they want you gone, and I won't let that happen." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Zara's fingers twisted in her lap, processing this declaration of protection from a man who'd been absent their entire lives, a stranger claiming the title of father. Her breathing quickened almost imperceptibly. Xena remained fixed on the clouds outside, her silence a wall between her and the father who'd suddenly materialized to save them, her reflection showing the tight clench of her jaw and the slight tremble of her lower lip she fought to control. That evening in his Virginia estate, Elijah stood in the dimly lit security room. Multiple monitors showed different angles of the sprawling property, casting a blue glow across his tired face. The soft hum of electronics filled the silence around him, but his eyes were fixed on the feed from the upstairs hallway. Through the night vision cameras, he could see his daughters sleeping in their separate rooms. Zara curled tightly on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek, her expression troubled even in sleep. Xena sprawled across her bed, one arm flung outward, both still fully clothed, as if ready to flee at a moment's notice. Their shoes remained on their feet, positioned for a quick escape. His reflection in the monitor showed every year of his age, every weight of his regret etched into the lines around his eyes. He rubbed a hand across his face, feeling the stubble of a day without shaving. "I'm here now," he whispered to the silent screens, fingers lightly touching the image of his daughters, the glass cool beneath his fingertips. "That has to count for something." The words disappeared into the empty room, heard by no one but himself. The Monday morning bustle of Washington, D.C. felt surreal after the intensity of Charleston. Elijah Warren's footsteps echoed through the marble halls of the Justice Department as he made his way to his office, his mind still on the two girls he'd left under protection at his Virginia estate. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders with each step he took, heavier than the leather briefcase swinging at his side. Miriam Steele stood waiting by his office door, her usual composed demeanor tinged with concern. Her dark blazer was perfectly pressed, but the tight grip on the red folder in her hands betrayed her tension. The slight furrow between her brows deepened when she saw him approach. "Welcome back, sir," she said, following him inside. "We need to talk." The gravity in her voice matched the stiffness in her posture. Elijah settled behind his desk, loosening his tie slightly. The familiar leather chair creaked beneath him as he exhaled slowly. "Show me." He braced himself, shoulders squared against whatever storm was coming. Miriam laid out the contents of the folder labeled Whitmore Reactions across his desk like a road map of incoming disasters. The Washington Post headline screamed, "A G. Warren claims biological connection to death row inmates." The Wall Street Journal was more subtle but equally damaging. Questions arise over Warren's last-minute intervention in South Carolina murder case. Television networks had already begun running special segments questioning his judgment. Each headline felt like another nail in a coffin being built around his career. "Senator Whitmore has been busy," Miriam said. Her voice clipped as she pointed to internal memos. Her perfectly manicured finger tapped against each document with quiet precision. "He's already met with the Senate Judiciary Committee. There's talk of an ethics investigation." Her efficiency couldn't mask the worry flickering behind her professional facade. Elijah picked up a confidential DOJ memo. His eyes narrowed as he read, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "They're questioning my authority to intervene?" The paper crinkled slightly under his tightening grip. "That's just the beginning." Miriam pulled out more documents, arranging them methodically before him. "3 major donors have threatened to withdraw support from the party if you pursue this. The Charleston DA's office is claiming federal overreach. And..." She hesitated, adjusting her glasses nervously. "Senator Whitmore is suggesting your personal connection makes this a clear conflict of interest." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. The morning sun streamed through the office windows, catching the dust motes in its beam. Elijah stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city he'd spent decades fighting to reach. The Washington Monument stood tall in the distance, a reminder of principles he'd sworn to uphold. His reflection in the glass looked tired, but determined. "Get my personal legal team here within the hour," he said finally, his reflection resolute in the glass. "And notify justice. I want a full federal review of the girl's trial. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every judicial ruling." His breath fogged the glass slightly as he spoke. Miriam didn't move. Her reflection joined his in the window as she stood her ground. "Sir, you need to understand what you're risking. This isn't just about your position. The Whitmores have connections throughout the government. They'll come after everything, your reputation, your legacy, your future." Her voice softened with genuine concern. "Everything you've worked for." Her eyes met his in the reflection, loyal but worried. "I don't care." Elijah turned back to face her, his expression resolute. The morning light caught the silver at his temples. "Those girls are innocent, and they're my daughters." The words seemed to strengthen him as he spoke them aloud. Miriam adjusted her glasses, studying him carefully. Her shrewd eyes searched his face for any sign of doubt. "Are you ready to lose everything for this?" The question wasn't just professional. There was a personal care beneath her words. Elijah met her gaze without hesitation. His voice dropped to a quiet, determined tone that filled the room. "Let them come." The simple declaration transformed the air in the office, turning uncertainty into purpose. The dining room of Elijah's Virginia estate stretched before them like a vast ocean, with Elijah anchored at one end and the twins perched at the other. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the polished mahogany table, but nothing could warm the frigid atmosphere between father and daughters. The cavernous space only emphasized the emotional distance separating them, a gulf wider than the 12 feet of gleaming wood between them. House staff moved silently, their footsteps muffled by thick carpeting as they placed steaming plates of food that none of them seemed eager to touch. The aroma of expertly prepared cuisine filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension that made swallowing nearly impossible. Zena stabbed at her grilled chicken with unnecessary force, the scraping of her fork against fine china making everyone wince. Her knuckles whitened around the silverware, betraying the anger she barely contained. "Nice place you've got here," Zena said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as her eyes swept across the ornate moldings and oil paintings that probably cost more than their entire childhood home. "Must be nice living like this while we grew up cleaning rich people's houses with Mom until our fingers cracked and bled from cheap cleaning products." Elijah carefully cut his food, maintaining his composure like a man who'd faced hostile courtrooms for decades. The slight tightening around his eyes was the only indication that her words had landed. He chewed methodically as if buying time to construct the perfect legal response. "Do you always eat alone in rooms bigger than our whole apartment?" Zena continued, pushing harder, her chin jutting forward defiantly. "Or is this special treatment just for the daughters you never bothered to know? The ones who shared a bedroom smaller than your bathroom?" Zara watched the exchange, her own food untouched, stomach too knotted to eat. She sat straighter, gathering courage that had been building since they'd arrived, and finally asked the question that had been burning inside both of them. "Why didn't our mother tell us about you all these years and we thought you just didn't want us?" The clinking of silverware stopped abruptly. Elijah lowered his fork, his shoulders heavy with the weight of history. "Your mother, Naomi," he began, his voice soft but clear across the expanse of table. "She was a nurse at Charleston Memorial when I met her. I was just starting my career in the DA's office. Young, ambitious, foolish. I thought I could change the world." He took a slow sip of water, choosing his words carefully, eyes distant with memory. "Our relationship wasn't welcome in Charleston. Not then. A young black attorney dating a white nurse. It caused problems, threats, violence, people who thought they owned the future and wouldn't let us have one together." "That didn't stop you from leaving," Zena cut in, her words sharp as knives, slicing through his explanation. "I never knew she was pregnant," Elijah continued, meeting their eyes with an intensity that made even Zena pause. "When things got dangerous, Naomi disappeared. Changed her name. I searched, but..." He spread his hands helplessly, the gesture incongruous with his usual authority. "She was protecting you both. From the hatred, from the danger my presence would have brought into your lives. From people who made it clear they would hurt anyone who threatened their idea of how the world should be. I only discovered the truth 3 weeks ago," he added, his voice catching slightly. "A probate clerk found her death certificate. It was linked to an old sealed file, one I'd been looking for years ago. When I saw your names..." He trailed off, the memory visibly painful, his composure cracking for the first time. Zara's fingers twisted in her napkin, wringing it like she was wringing out the past. All those years cleaning houses, struggling to eat, Mom working double shifts until she got sick, watching her fade away while we couldn't even afford decent care, wondering why we weren't good enough for our father. "If I had known," Elijah started, a rare note of pleading entering his voice, his hand reaching slightly across the vast table. "But you didn't," Zara whispered as the staff cleared their barely touched plates with practiced discretion. "You left, and we paid the price. Every single day, every birthday, every Christmas. Every time Mom cried herself to sleep thinking we couldn't hear." The words hung in the air between them, heavy as storm clouds. Elijah's silence filled the massive room, dense with decades of loss and regret. The gentle clink of dishes being cleared was the only sound as 3 people, bound by blood but separated by years of absence, sat trapped in the weight of what could have been, and the reality of what was. A family broken before it had even begun. The morning sun filtered through tall windows into Elijah's private study, now transformed into a command center. Files and laptops covered every surface, and 3 large screens dominated one wall, displaying timelines and evidence charts in glowing detail. Elijah sat behind his imposing oak desk, his jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, ready for battle like a general preparing for a crucial campaign. His eyes burned with determination as he reviewed the notes he'd made during another sleepless night. The door opened as his hand-picked team filed in. Franklin Moore entered first, his weathered face bearing the focused expression of a man who'd spent 30 years unraveling the FBI's toughest cases. Deep lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights pursuing justice, and his confident stride revealed a man who never backed down from a challenge. Dana Reese followed, carrying her specialized laptop and external drives, her quick eyes already scanning the room's setup, mentally cataloging everything she saw. Her fingers twitched slightly, eager to start working. Judge Carmen Liu entered last, her silver hair pulled back severely, her bearing still carrying the gravitas of her decades on the federal bench, her posture ramrod straight. She carried a stack of legal documents with yellow sticky notes protruding from all sides. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Elijah said, gesturing to the chairs before his desk. "We're dealing with more than just a wrongful conviction. This is about systematic corruption wearing the mask of justice, a perversion of everything our legal system should stand for." He passed each of them a folder containing his initial findings, watching their expressions as they scanned the contents. Dana opened her laptop immediately, the screen's blue glow reflecting on her determined face. "I've already started preliminary data mining on the case files. The digital trail is concerning. Files were accessed and modified at strange hours." She turned her screen to show them a timeline of suspicious activity, red flags highlighting the most troubling patterns. Franklin spread crime scene photos across the desk with practiced precision. No blood spatter analysis, no fingerprint matches. The body position doesn't match the prosecution's theory of the crime. His finger tapped each photo methodically like a teacher highlighting crucial details. This investigation was deliberately incomplete. They weren't looking for truth. He shook his head, disgust evident in the tightening of his mouth. "The trial transcripts are worse," Carmen added, her voice tight with controlled anger that made her words even more powerful. Judge Knox overruled every meaningful defense objection. He blocked character witnesses for the girls. He allowed hearsay testimony about their attitude problems at work. She pulled out a thick folder, worn at the edges from her repeated review. The jury instructions were practically a roadmap to conviction. Her fingers traced a particularly egregious passage underlined in red pen. Dana's fingers flew across her keyboard, creating a rhythmic tapping sound. The Whitmore estate had comprehensive security cameras, but footage from the day of the murder is just gone. No technical explanation for the gap. It's as if someone deliberately erased it. She pulled up a diagram showing the security system's coverage and the suspicious timing of the outage. "The prosecution claimed the girls disabled it," Franklin noted, shaking his head in disgust. "But there's no evidence they had that capability or knowledge of the system. They were set up, plain and simple." "Of course not," Carmen said flatly, her eyes flashing with indignation. "This case was rigged from the beginning. Look at the jury selection. They dismissed every black juror for cause. The media coverage was all filtered through Whitmore-owned news outlets. The deck was stacked before the first card was dealt." She tossed a local newspaper onto the desk, its headline condemning the girls before trial even began. Elijah stood, pacing behind his desk, energy radiating from his movements. "We need to prove the fix was in. Find me something concrete, something that can't be explained away." His hand rested briefly on a photo of the two young women, their faces haunting him day and night. "Already have a lead," Dana said, a hint of triumph in her voice. "Judge Knox's financial records show regular payments from a shell company. I'm tracing the ownership structure now. Money always leaves footprints." She turned her screen to display a complex web of transactions, a red line highlighting Knox's connection. Carmen stood, gripping a file tightly, her knuckles white with tension. This was never about justice. This was about keeping their world clean, preserving their perfect image. Her voice trembled slightly with righteous anger. Elijah took the file, his jaw set with determination that hardened his features. "Then it's time to dirty it. Time to expose the truth, no matter who it hurts." He placed his hand on the stack of evidence, a silent promise to the women whose freedom depended on what they discovered. The soft blue glow from Zena's laptop screen cast eerie shadows across her bedroom walls. She sat cross-legged on her bed, headphones clamped tight over her ears, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced precision. The room felt smaller in the darkness, more like a cocoon than a prison. The digital clock on her nightstand blinked 2:17 a.m., but sleep was the furthest thing from her mind tonight. Her heart raced with purpose, fueled by years of bottled anger and the promise of vindication. Come on," she muttered, bypassing the first layer of the Whitmore estate's security. She remembered the system well from her cleaning days. How many times had she watched the security team input their codes while she dusted the monitors, pretending not to notice? They'd never suspected the quiet cleaning girl was memorizing their every move, storing away information like ammunition for a future battle. They'd looked right through her as if she were nothing more than another piece of furniture in their mansion. The familiar interface appeared on her screen. Zena allowed herself a small smile. During those long months of housekeeping, she'd learned more than just how to polish silver and fold fitted sheets. She'd absorbed every detail, every password carelessly spoken, every routine of the house's smart system. The Whitmores had treated her like she was invisible, just another nameless employee maintaining their perfect world. Their mistake. Their arrogance would be their downfall, and Zena would make sure of it. Her fingers flew faster as she navigated through folders of data. Security cameras, temperature controls, lighting schedules. There. Audio archives. The guest house had been wired with microphones. Standard security measure, they'd said. But Zena knew better. The Whitmores recorded everything, hoarding secrets like dragons hoarded gold. Nothing happened on their property without being captured, analyzed, and stored away. Not a whisper escaped their digital nets. A damaged file caught her eye. Blake Guest House 03:10 p.m. The timestamp matched the night of the murder. Her heart pounded as she ran recovery software, watching the progress bar inch forward. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she silently willed the program to work faster. Each passing second felt like an eternity, the quiet of her bedroom broken only by the soft whirring of her laptop fan. Static crackled through her headphones, then voices emerged, distorted but clearing. "You can't keep doing this," Blake's voice, angry and scared. Another male voice, deeper, equally furious. "You'll shut up if you know what's good for you." "Hunter, you need to stop." Blake again, desperate now. Zena's breath caught. Hunter. The name hit her like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of her laptop so hard her knuckles turned white. Her throat tightened as memories flooded back. The courtroom, his perfectly pressed suit, the rehearsed testimony that had helped seal their fate. The argument continued, growing more heated. Threats flew back and forth, words lost to static. Then, a heavy thud, a cry cut short. The second voice, Hunter's voice, shouted something unintelligible. The recording ended. Zena sat frozen, her hands hovering over the keyboard. The name echoed in her mind. Hunter. Hunter Lockridge. The senator's golden boy. The one who'd testified against them at the trial, claiming he'd seen the twins arguing with Blake that day. The perfect witness with his perfect family and perfect future, all built on a perfect lie. A lie that had nearly destroyed her and Zara's lives. With trembling fingers, she copied the file to a flash drive. The small device felt impossibly heavy as she locked it in her desk drawer. Evidence. Real evidence. Not the circumstantial garbage they'd used to convict her and Zara. This was their ticket to freedom, and Hunter Lockridge's ticket to justice. The weight of this discovery pressed on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "Got you," she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. A tear slid down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. For the first time in years, she felt something dangerously close to hope. It flickered inside her like a fragile flame, warming parts of her soul that had gone cold long ago. The flash drive sat in her drawer like a live grenade, waiting to explode the carefully constructed lies that had nearly cost her and her sister their lives. Tomorrow, she would tell Zara. Tomorrow, everything would change. The thought of her sister's face when she heard the news made Zena's lips curve into a smile. Justice was finally within reach. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11:30, its deep chimes echoing through the quiet estate like distant thunder. Elijah sat at his mahogany desk, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold beside stacks of legal papers that seemed to multiply by the hour. The lamp cast a warm, golden glow across his tired features as he rubbed his temples, fighting off the headache that had been threatening all evening. His eyes burned from hours of reading fine print, searching for anything that might help his daughters. A soft knock at the door made him look up, grateful for the interruption. "Come in," he called, surprise flickering across his face as Zara stepped inside. She wore oversized pajamas, probably borrowed from the clothes they'd gotten her after the release, and looked small, vulnerable, like a child despite her 23 years. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, and her eyes held the haunted look that never quite seemed to leave them. "I can't sleep," she said quietly, hovering near the doorway, one hand still on the doorknob as if preparing for a quick escape. "I need to tell you something." Her voice carried a weight that made Elijah's heart clench. Elijah gestured to the leather chair across from his desk, his heart quickening. "Of course. Please, sit." He pushed aside the papers, giving her his full attention. Zara perched on the edge of the seat, her hands twisting in her lap like restless birds. The overhead light caught the tiny scar above her eyebrow, a reminder of her childhood that Elijah had missed. That night. The night Blake died. Her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "I saw something. Something I never told anyone. Not even Zena." The room felt heavy with the weight of her words, the air itself seeming to thicken. Elijah leaned forward, his expression gentle but intent, afraid that any sudden movement might cause her to retreat back into silence. The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder in the pause. "I saw Hunter Lockridge leaving the guest house," she continued, the words tumbling out now like water through a broken dam. There was blood on his shirt. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely walk straight. He didn't see me. I was behind the garden shed getting cleaning supplies for the morning shift. Her fingers gripped the fabric of her pajama pants, knuckles turning white. Tears welled in her eyes, catching the lamplight. I wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? A black girl accusing Hunter Lockridge? His family owns half the county and has friends in every courthouse. She wiped her cheeks roughly with the back of her hand. And I was scared for Zena. She has such a temper. I thought if I told her, she'd confront him, and then... She shook her head, unable to finish the thought. Elijah rose slowly from his desk, walking around to where Zara sat. His movement was careful, like approaching a frightened deer in a clearing. "You were protecting your sister," he said softly, "and yourself." The realization of what she had carried alone for all these years made his chest ache. "I let them sentence us to death," Zara whispered, her voice breaking into jagged pieces, "because I was too afraid to speak up." A tear slid down her cheek, leaving a glistening trail in its wake. Elijah knelt beside her chair, ignoring the protest from his aging knees. "You were 18, alone and terrified. The system was built to silence voices like yours." He reached for her hand, covering it with his own warm palm. "But you're not alone anymore. You're so brave for telling me now." His voice carried the conviction of a promise. Zara's composure crumbled like a sand castle at high tide. She fell forward into his arms, sobbing. For the first time since their mother died, since the trial, since everything had been taken from them. Elijah held her close, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears, feeling her shoulders shake with each ragged breath. "You've carried this too long?" he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Let me carry it now." He stroked her hair gently, the way he'd never had the chance to when she was young. They sat there in the quiet study as the night deepened outside the windows, the moon casting silver shadows across the lawn, father and daughter connected by shared pain and newfound trust, a fragile bridge built across years of absence. In that moment, something broken began, ever so slightly, to heal. The DOJ press room buzzed with anticipation, cameras clicking and reporters shuffling in their seats. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting sharp shadows across the polished wooden podium where Elijah Warren stood, his navy suit crisp and his expression resolute. A hush fell over the room as he approached the microphone, the air thick with tension and expectation. "Good morning," he began, his deep voice commanding immediate silence. "Today, I am announcing that the Department of Justice is launching a comprehensive federal review of the Mitchell case, involving the conviction of Zara and Zena Mitchell in Charleston, South Carolina." His words hung in the air, weighted with significance, like stones dropped into still water. Hands shot up immediately, but Elijah continued without pause, his shoulders squared with determination. "Our preliminary investigation has uncovered serious irregularities in the trial proceedings, including potential suppression of critical evidence. The integrity of our justice system demands thorough examination when such concerns arise. This is not a decision I've made lightly, but one that justice requires." The room erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions from every direction. Camera flashes intensified like lightning in a storm. Elijah maintained his composure, addressing each question with measured precision, his hands steady on the edges of the podium while the storm raged around him. "Attorney General Warren, are you not compromised by your personal connection to this case?" called out a reporter from the front row, her pen poised over her notepad, eyes narrowed with scrutiny. "My role as a father does not diminish my duty to justice," Elijah responded firmly, meeting her gaze directly. "If anything, it has brought to light a grave miscarriage of justice that might have otherwise gone unnoticed. I stand here today not just as Attorney General, but as someone committed to the truth, regardless of personal cost." Within hours, the news dominated every major network, crawling across tickers and filling headlines. Senator Thomas Whitmore's office released a scathing statement that flashed across screens nationwide. "This is a disgraceful abuse of power by an attorney general who has lost all objectivity. The Whitmore family demands his immediate recusal from a case where his judgment is clearly clouded by personal interests." Back in his office, Elijah reviewed the mounting responses with Miriam Steele. She handed him printouts of social media reactions and news coverage, her face tighter than usual, concern etched in the lines around her eyes as she maintained her characteristic composure. "The conservative outlets are calling for your resignation," she said quietly, pointing to particularly harsh headlines. "And the threats are getting more specific. This isn't just political blowback anymore, Elijah. This is becoming dangerous." As if on cue, an aide knocked and entered holding a single sheet of paper with trembling fingers. "This was just slipped under your door, sir. Security is reviewing the hallway footage now." The young man's face was pale, betraying his nervousness. Elijah read the typed message. "Stay out of this or bury them with you." His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened slightly, a muscle working beneath the surface, the only visible sign of his concern. "Miriam," he said calmly, folding the paper carefully. "Double the security detail at the estate. I want round-the-clock surveillance and additional personnel screening. No one gets within 100 yards of those girls without thorough vetting. Not a single person." His voice was quiet but firm, brooking no argument. She nodded, already typing on her tablet with quick, efficient movements. "What about these threats?" "They're escalating. We should consider informing the FBI. Document everything. They're leaving a trail and they're getting sloppy." Elijah walked to his window and slowly closed the blinds, the threatening note still in his hand. Looking out through the slats at the Washington skyline, buildings glowing golden in the afternoon sun, he whispered, "They're scared. Good. That means we're getting closer to the truth." His reflection in the glass showed a man unbowed, determined to face whatever storm was coming. The war room hummed with focused energy as Franklin Moore, Carmen Liu, and Dana Reese gathered around the central table. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the whiteboard covered in red and black markers, connecting names with arrows and timelines that spanned months. Charts and photographs lined the walls, a visual web of connections they had spent weeks uncovering, painstakingly piecing together the intricate web of corruption and deceit. Dana's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the red evidence binder. "You need to see this," she said, spreading out the printed emails across the table. These were buried in Blake Whitmore's cloud backup, hidden in a folder labeled Insurance. It took 3 recovery programs to access them. The emails told a dark and disturbing story. Messages between Blake and H. Locke revealed a pattern of threats and counter-threats. Blake had discovered Hunter Lockridge's involvement in a local drug operation and was demanding payment for his silence. The exchanges grew increasingly hostile over the course of 6 weeks, with the final message from Locke reading, "You have no idea what you're playing with. Back off or regret it." This chilling message was sent just 48 hours before Blake's untimely death. Carmen Lou's face hardened as she read the damning evidence. "Hunter Lockridge," she confirmed, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "The son of State Representative James Lockridge. The same family that donated heavily to Judge Knox's re-election campaign, $30,000 just last quarter alone." Franklin Moore, the retired FBI investigator, spread out more documents, his expression grave. "There's more. We found sealed testimony from Maria Hernandez, a maid who worked at the guest house. She saw someone matching Hunter's description enter the building the night Blake died. Her statement was buried, marked as unreliable witness, and sealed by court order. Someone went to great lengths to discredit her." "The corruption goes deeper than we thought," Carmen said, pacing the room, her usually composed demeanor cracking with barely contained fury. "They didn't just rush the trial. They actively suppressed evidence that would have pointed to another suspect. They built a wall of protection around Hunter." The door opened and Elijah Warren entered, his tie loosened after a morning of meetings. His eyes showed the fatigue of sleepless nights. Dana quickly briefed him on their findings, pointing out the pattern of institutional protection around Hunter Lockridge. "The timeline fits," Franklin added, gesturing to the whiteboard. "Blake threatens to expose the operation, Hunter panics, and suddenly Blake ends up dead. Then the system activates to protect one of their own. Judge Knox was the final gatekeeper." Carmen picked up a court document, her knuckles white with the intensity of her grip. "This isn't justice. This is systematic corruption protecting the privileged while sacrificing 2 innocent girls. They never stood a chance in Knox's courtroom." Dana gathered the emails into a neat pile, her expression grim. She looked directly at Elijah and said, "Blake was going to talk. That's why he died." Elijah nodded grimly. "Then we need to talk louder than he ever could, and make sure the whole world listens." The door flew open with a bang that made Zara jump in her chair, her earbuds falling out and clattering onto her desk. Zena stood in the doorway, her chest heaving, face flushed with anger. The soft lamplight caught the tears already forming in her eyes, turning them into glistening pools of hurt and betrayal. Her hands trembled at her sides, knuckles white with tension. "How could you?" Zena's voice cracked like thin ice underfoot. "How could you just trust him like that? After everything?" Each word seemed to cost her, like she was pulling them from somewhere deep and painful. Zara slowly turned away from her desk, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The familiar knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. "Zena, it's not what you think." "No? Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, you've forgotten everything we've been through, everything we survived without him." Zena paced the room like a caged animal, her hands clenching and unclenching as if searching for something to hold on to or break. Her footsteps fell heavy on the wooden floor, each step punctuating her words. All those birthdays, all those nights we cried ourselves to sleep, did they mean nothing? "I told him about Hunter," Zara said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous, like smoke before a fire catches. Zena froze mid-step. "What?" The color drained from her face, leaving her looking suddenly young and vulnerable. "I saw Hunter leaving the guest house that night. He was covered in blood. I've carried that secret for months, Zena, months." Zara's voice rose as years of suppressed emotion burst forth like a dam breaking. "I couldn't take it anymore. It was eating me alive. Every night I close my eyes and see him there walking away like nothing happened." "So you told him?" Zena's laugh was bitter, hollow, echoing off the walls. A man who showed up 5 minutes ago? Instead of me, your own sister? The person who's been here through everything? I was protecting you. Zara stood up, her own anger rising to meet her sister's. I was always protecting you. Do you know what it's like, carrying that alone, being afraid every single day, jumping at shadows, wondering if Hunter knows that I saw him? Naive, Zena spat the word like poison. You're being naive. He'll use this, use us, just like everyone else who promised to care. Like every foster parent who said they'd keep us together. Like every teacher who said they'd help. They all disappeared when things got hard. And you're being cruel, Zara shot back, finding strength in her voice she rarely used. You're so wrapped up in your anger that you can't see when someone actually wants to help us. You don't even give him a chance. The sisters stood facing each other, both breathing hard, tears streaming down their faces. The silence stretched between them like a physical thing, a chasm growing wider by the second. The old alarm clock on the bedside table ticked loudly, counting down moments neither could take back. Finally, Zena's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her body. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice small and childlike. I'm scared because what if he actually cares? What if he stays? What happens to us then? What do you mean? Zara asked, confusion softening her anger. She took a tentative step toward her sister. We survived together, just us. If he's real, if he's actually here to stay. Zena's voice broke, revealing the frightened girl beneath the tough exterior. I don't know how to be anything but your protector, and now you don't need just me anymore. I'll always need you. Zara reached for her sister's hand, her touch gentle. But maybe we can need him too. Maybe we deserve more than just surviving. Zena yanked her hand away as if burned and stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind her. The vibration rattled the small framed photo of the twins on Zara's desk. As Zena collapsed onto her bed in the next room, her whisper echoed in the empty space, barely audible but filled with raw truth. I don't know how to trust. I never learned how. The morning sun glinted off the white marble columns of the federal courthouse as Elijah Warren stood before a wall of cameras and microphones. His navy suit was crisp, his expression resolute, though the deep lines around his eyes betrayed nights of sleepless preparation. Behind him, his legal team maintained perfect composure, led by Rebecca Hale, whose silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp, determined features. The tension in the air was palpable, like electricity before a storm. Today, we present irrefutable evidence of a grave miscarriage of justice. Elijah's voice carried across the crowd with quiet authority, each word measured and deliberate. 2 innocent young women were sentenced to death based on prejudice, not proof. His words hung in the humid morning air, heavy with their implications. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as he held up the thick manila file containing weeks of intensive investigation. His hands remained steady despite the weight of what lay within. The recovered audio files, sealed testimonies, and most crucially, Zara's written statement about Hunter Lockridge. The morning breeze ruffled the edges of the papers, as if trying to reveal their secrets. Each document represented another crack in the foundation of lies that had nearly buried the Mitchell twins. The courthouse's grand hallway fell silent as Elijah and his team made their way to the clerk's office. Rebecca Hale's heels clicked against the marble floor as she carried the motion papers, the sound echoing off the high ceilings like a countdown. Several passing lawyers stopped to stare, recognizing the gravity of the moment. The filing clerk's eyes widened when he saw the Attorney General himself approaching his desk, his morning coffee forgotten, the steam still rising from the untouched cup. Emergency motion to reopen Mitchell versus State of South Carolina, Rebecca stated formally, placing the documents on the counter with practiced precision. Her voice never wavered, though her knuckles whitened slightly as she released the papers. Within an hour, they stood before Judge Marcus Pearson in his chambers, surrounded by dark wooden panels and the musty smell of old law books. The judge's weathered face remained impassive as he reviewed the preliminary evidence, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. His fingers traced over the sealed testimonies, pausing at Zara's statement, his breath catching slightly. The ticking of an antique clock on the wall marked each passing moment of silence. "This is explosive material, Mr. Warren," Judge Pearson said finally, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Given the gravity of these claims and their potential national implications, I'm scheduling an emergency hearing for Monday morning. It will be televised." His voice carried the weight of decades on the bench, understanding exactly what kind of storm was about to break. As they exited the courthouse, reporters swarmed again like hungry wolves, microphones thrust forward like weapons. A young journalist from the Washington Post pushed forward, her press badge swinging wildly, determination flashing in her eyes. "Attorney General Warren, is this case personal for you?" Elijah paused, turning to face the cameras directly, his shoulders squared. It's always personal when justice is denied. The simple truth in his words seemed to quiet the crowd for just a heartbeat. The crowd erupted with questions, but Elijah's attention was drawn to Judge Pearson, who had followed them out onto the sun-warmed steps. The judge's expression was grave as he beckoned Elijah aside, away from the press's eager ears. Sweat beaded on the older man's forehead, not entirely from the heat. "You'd better be ready," the judge said in a low voice, leaning closer, his eyes reflecting both warning and concern. "If you lose this, there's no coming back." The weight of those words settled heavily in the morning air, as tangible as the humidity. Behind them, the courthouse stood silent and imposing, its shadow stretching across the steps like a warning, a reminder of all the lives that had been shaped, and sometimes broken, within its walls. For a moment, Elijah could almost hear the echoes of all those who had sought justice here, and all those who had been denied it. The estate's grand living room was bathed in soft lamplight, casting long shadows across the Persian rugs. Zara and Zena sat close together on the leather sofa, their shoulders touching but their eyes fixed straight ahead. The tick of an antique grandfather clock echoed through the quiet space, marking each second with solemn precision. Outside, darkness had settled over the grounds, wrapping the mansion in a blanket of night that matched their somber mood. Elijah entered silently, his usual commanding presence softened by the evening's wait. He chose the armchair across from them, loosening his tie with a weary sigh. The fabric of his suit, still crisp despite the late hour, rustled as he settled in. For a moment they sat in shared silence, the weight of tomorrow pressing down on all of them like an invisible blanket. "Whatever happens in that courtroom," Elijah began, his voice gentle but firm, "you need to know something." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze direct and unwavering. The lines around his eyes deepened with sincerity. "I failed you both once, I won't fail you again." Zena's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. A muscle flickered in her cheek, betraying the emotion she fought to contain. Zara's fingers twisted in her lap, tangling and untangling with nervous energy, her nails occasionally catching on the hem of her sweater. "The world tried to make you invisible," Elijah continued. "They thought two black girls wouldn't matter, that no one would fight for you." His eyes grew bright with unshed tears, glistening in the soft light. His hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles whitened. "But they were wrong. You matter. Your truth matters. And we're going to make them see it." After their talk, Zara retreated to her room. She stood before the full-length mirror, practicing her testimony over and over. Her voice trembled at first, barely audible even to herself, then grew stronger with each repetition. "I saw Hunter Lockridge leave the guest house that night." She watched her reflection, searching for any sign of weakness the defense might exploit, any tremor or downcast eyes that could be used against her. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but her resolve hardened with every practice run. Outside her door, Zena listened, her forehead pressed against the wood, eyes closed tight, absorbing every word of her sister's practice. Her fists clenched and unclenched at her sides. Later, she scribbled a note on hotel stationery. "I believe you." Her hands shook slightly as she slid it under Zara's door, then lingered for a moment before walking away, her footsteps nearly silent on the plush carpet. When Zara found the note, she sank onto her bed. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she traced her sister's handwriting with her finger. The simple words meant everything, a lifeline in the storm they were facing together. She held the paper to her chest, feeling as though it contained more strength than its thin fibers should be able to hold. A soft knock came at her door. When she opened it, Zeena stood there, her usual sharp edges softened by exhaustion and emotion. No words were needed. They sat together on Zara's bed, fingers intertwined, watching the digital clock's red numbers march toward midnight. The estate was silent except for their quiet breathing and the distant sound of Elijah's footsteps as he paced in his study, preparing for the battle ahead, a father finally standing guard. Through the window, stars punctured the darkness, silent witnesses to the night before everything would change. The federal courthouse loomed before them, its massive marble columns stark against the crisp morning sky. Camera flashes exploded like lightning strikes as Elijah Warren guided Zara and Zeena up the wide stone steps. Protesters crowded on both sides of the metal police barrier, some with handmade signs demanding justice for the twins, others with angry faces calling for the original verdict to stand. The sisters kept their heads down, shoulders hunched against the barrage of shouted questions and accusations that cut through the cool air. Inside the hushed courtroom 3A, Judge Lorraine Desai sat straight-backed behind the polished wooden bench, her silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe, neat bun. Her penetrating dark eyes moved deliberately between the parties as she tapped her gavel once and called the emergency hearing to order, her voice carrying authority throughout the packed room. The spectators settled into an expectant silence, the tension almost palpable. When Zara took the stand, her hands trembled visibly as she gripped the smooth wooden rail. The microphone picked up her shaky breath, amplifying her nervousness. But as she began to speak, her voice found its strength growing steadier with each word. She straightened her shoulders slightly, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "I was early that morning for cleaning," she testified, her words clear despite their softness, her gaze fixed straight ahead. "The guest house door was open. I went in and—" She paused, swallowing hard, steadying herself against the rush of painful memories. "I found Blake. But before that, the night before, I saw Hunter Lockridge leaving. His shirt had blood on it. He was running through the back garden toward his car." Her fingers curled tighter around the wooden rail as she finished, knuckles turning white with the effort. The courtroom hung on every word, the silence so complete you could hear the ceiling fan spinning overhead. Judge Desai leaned forward slightly, her gold pen moving methodically across her lined notepad. Several jurors shifted in their seats, their expressions a mix of surprise and keen interest. The defense team rose next, a young attorney carefully placing a silver laptop and portable speakers on the evidence table. "Your Honor, we've recovered partial audio from the Whitmore Estate's security system." The scratchy recording filled the silent room. Through bursts of static and electronic interference, Blake Whitmore's voice rang out clearly. "Hunter, you need to stop. This isn't right." A loud crash followed, then ominous silence. The attorney let the final seconds of empty static play out, the absence of sound somehow more damning than any words could be. Gasps rippled through the gallery like a wave. Several jurors exchanged meaningful glances. Judge Desai's expression remained perfectly neutral, but her eyes narrowed slightly as she listened, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. She made a brief notation on her pad, her pen pressing firmly into the paper. After a brief 30-minute recess, she returned to the bench with purposeful steps to deliver her ruling. Given the new evidence presented and serious questions about the thoroughness of the original investigation, I am granting an immediate stay of execution. Furthermore, I order this case reopened with full discovery privileges granted to the defense. Her gavel crack echoed like thunder throughout the suddenly electric room. This court will reconvene in 2 weeks to establish a timeline for proceedings. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters rushed for the double doors, phones already pressed to their ears, shouting updates to their editors. Elijah's legal team exchanged triumphant looks and quick handshakes. Zeena sat perfectly still in the front row, her face unreadable, though a single tear tracked down her cheek, glistening under the harsh fluorescent lights. As Zara descended from the witness stand, her legs wobbled slightly beneath her. Elijah moved forward instinctively, his large hand catching her elbow with gentle firmness. For a moment she tensed at his touch, then slowly she let herself lean against his steadying grip. It was the smallest gesture, barely noticeable to anyone watching, but in it lay the first fragile bridge of trust between father and daughter. Something long buried inside her began to stir, like the first tentative shoots of spring after a harsh winter. The estate's security system hummed quietly as evening settled over Northern Virginia. Inside his study, Elijah Warren's measured steps traced paths across the Persian rug, while his phone buzzed relentlessly on the desk. Every screen in the room flickered with news coverage. His daughter's faces splashed across CNN, Fox, MSNBC. Their images haunted each channel, a constant reminder of what was at stake. The weight of it all pressed down on him like a physical burden, making each breath feel labored. "Sir," Miriam's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "Senator Davidson just withdrew his support. 3 more committee chairs are threatening to do the same." She paused, shuffling papers. "But Judge Rodriguez called. She says to keep pushing. She's gathering evidence of similar cases that were railroaded through the system. Says this might be the breakthrough we've been waiting for." Her tone carried a hint of hope, a rare commodity these days. Elijah stopped pacing, his shoulders tight with tension that had become his constant companion. "And the White House?" He rubbed at the back of his neck, trying to ease the knots that had formed there. "Official statement is no comment. Unofficial channels say they're waiting to see which way the wind blows. Typical politics," she added with barely disguised contempt. The disappointment in her voice mirrored his own feelings. Down the hall in the media room, Zara and Zena sat side by side on the leather couch, watching themselves on multiple screens. Zara's testimony played on repeat, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. Social media exploded with hashtags: number justice for the Mitchells, number Warren twins, number systemic corruption. The girl's story had captured the nation's attention in ways no one had anticipated. Every news outlet clamored for exclusive interviews, for more details, for anything to feed the hungry machine of 24-hour coverage. "This is surreal," Zena muttered, scrolling through her phone. "We're trending higher than that K-pop group. People we don't even know are fighting for us." Her finger paused over a particularly passionate defense from a stranger in Seattle. Zara hugged her knees to her chest, her expression troubled. "I keep seeing Mom's picture too. Everyone's digging up old stories about her. It feels like they're picking through our lives with tweezers." She winced as another photo appeared, their mother's graduation picture taken years before either of them was born. The producer from 60 Minutes called for the 3rd time that day. Elijah's response remained firm. "This isn't about ratings or views. This is about 2 young women's lives. No interviews." He wouldn't allow his daughters to become media spectacles, not when they'd already endured so much. Their dignity mattered more than any potential public relations advantage. Miriam continued her update, her voice growing more serious. "The threats are escalating, sir. 3 more congressional allies have suggested you consider your position. They're using words like career suicide and political liability. They're running scared." The clicking of her keyboard punctuated her words. "Let them talk," Elijah replied, his voice hard as granite. "We knew this was coming. We prepared for it." His resolve hadn't wavered, not even for a moment. The security radio crackled to life, cutting through the tension. "Base, we've got an unmarked vehicle, dark SUV, passing the gate. No lights, license plate obscured. Over." Elijah moved to the window, watching the black shape glide past like a shark in dark water. His fists clenched at his sides, knuckles white with tension. But he didn't move from his post, didn't give them the satisfaction of appearing rattled. They were trying to intimidate him, but he wouldn't bend. Not now, not ever, not when his daughters needed him most. "Sir?" Miriam's voice was quiet now, concern evident in her tone. "Should we increase security again?" "Double the patrols," he answered without hesitation. "And Miriam?" "Get me everything we have on Hunter Lockridge's movements that night. Everything. If there's a thread to pull, I want to find it." His reflection in the window stared back at him, determined and unflinching. The neon signs cast eerie shadows across the damp pavement as Elijah emerged from the dimly lit bar. His mind raced with the shocking revelations the DOJ informant had just shared: documented evidence of tampering, witness intimidation, and a complex web of corruption reaching into the highest levels of South Carolina's justice system. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on him like a physical burden. Elijah's trusted driver of 7 years, Marcus Lane, fell into step behind him. Their footsteps echoed off the brick walls as they approached the armored SUV parked in the narrow alley. The night air felt thick with tension, carrying the faint scent of rain and distant cigarette smoke. "Sir," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "we should get you back to the estate. The girls will be worried." His eyes scanned the shadows, a habit born from years of protective service. Elijah nodded and reached for the vehicle's door handle, his thoughts already turning to his daughters. In that split second, the world erupted. A deafening blast ripped through the night, lifting the 3-ton SUV off the ground like a toy. The force threw Elijah backward, his body slamming against the rough concrete. Shards of glass rained down like deadly hail, glittering in the orange glow of sudden flames. The vehicle flipped, landing on its roof with a sickening crunch of metal that echoed between the buildings. Intense heat washed over Elijah as flames engulfed the wreckage. Through his blurred vision, he saw Marcus sprawled motionless nearby, a dark silhouette against the fiery backdrop. Blood trickled down Elijah's face, warm and sticky, and his suit was torn and soaked crimson. Every breath felt like fire in his chest, each inhale a struggle against crushing pain. People poured out of the bar, their shocked voices barely audible over the roar of flames. Someone was calling 911, and multiple phones recorded the inferno, their screens capturing the horror unfolding in the alley. Within minutes, police cruisers and fire trucks arrived, their emergency lights painting the scene in surreal flashes of red and blue against the night sky. Paramedics rushed to stabilize both men, their movements urgent but practiced. "Attorney General Warren is down," one shouted into his radio, voice tight with tension. "Multiple injuries, possible internal bleeding." They worked quickly to immobilize Elijah's neck and load him onto a stretcher, careful hands moving with precision despite the chaos. News vans began arriving before the flames were fully extinguished, reporters spilling onto the scene with cameras and microphones at the ready. They thrust microphones toward the police line, demanding details about what was clearly an assassination attempt on America's top law enforcement official. "Clear the area," an officer bellowed, his voice authoritative as he stretched yellow tape across the entrance to the alley. "This is now a federal crime scene." Back at Elijah's estate, Zara sat in the living room reviewing her testimony notes when breaking news cut into regular programming. Her heart stopped as she saw the burning wreckage on the screen. The caption read, "Attorney General Warren critically injured in car bombing." The pen she'd been holding clattered to the floor, forgotten. Her anguished scream pierced the quiet house. "Elijah, he's in the hospital." The sound of her cry echoed through the halls, a daughter's desperate plea for the father she had only just begun to know. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, fear gripping her heart like a vice. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Zara and Zena burst through the hospital's main entrance. Their hearts pounded in sync, fear etched across their identical faces. Sweat beaded on their foreheads from the mad dash across town. A nurse with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair met them, clipboard in hand, her expression professionally calm but sympathetic. "This way," she said softly, leading them down a maze of sterile corridors. The antiseptic smell burned their nostrils as the steady rhythm of medical equipment grew louder with each hurried step. Monitors beeped in distant rooms and hushed voices floated around them like ghosts. The ICU doors whispered open with a soft hydraulic sigh. Zara's breath caught in her throat, a strangled gasp that seemed to echo in the quiet room. There lay Elijah, their father, nearly unrecognizable beneath a web of tubes and bandages. Angry red burns marked his exposed skin, raw and blistered. The ventilator's mechanical hiss filled the room with its terrible rhythm, forcing air into lungs that couldn't work on their own. Zena stopped dead in the doorway, her usual sharp tongue silenced by the sight. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the cold doorframe, knuckles turning white. Zara moved forward as if in a trance, her shoes squeaking softly against the polished floor, before sinking into the chair beside his bed. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she reached for his bandaged hand, careful not to disturb the IV line. "Daddy," she whispered, the word feeling foreign yet right on her tongue, a name she'd dreamed of saying for 18 years. Something in Zeena broke. The wall she'd built over 18 years of abandonment crumbled like sand. Her knees gave way as deep, racking sobs tore from her chest. She slid to the floor, arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly with the force of her grief. "He can't die now," she wailed, her voice raw and young. "Not now. Not when we just found him. It's not fair. It's not fair." A nurse with gentle hands helped her to her feet, guiding her to the other side of Elijah's bed. The twins sat in mirror positions, each holding one of their father's hands. Hours passed in the rhythm of beeping monitors and whispered prayers. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds, marking time in this suspended reality. The trauma physician came and went, checking vitals and adjusting medications, his face a mask of professional concern. The nurses moved quietly around them, respect in their gentle movements, occasionally offering water or blankets. Through it all, the girls didn't let go, as if their grip alone could anchor him to this world. As morning light began filtering through the blinds, painting golden stripes across the sterile floor, Zara felt it, the slightest pressure against her palm. Elijah's fingers twitched. His eyelids fluttered, fighting against the weight of unconsciousness. "Zeena," Zara gasped, her voice cracking with hope. "He moved." "I felt it." They leaned forward, hope blazing in their tear-stained faces, chairs scraping against the floor. His hand tightened slightly in Zara's grasp, weak but deliberate. He was still fighting, still with them, a tiny sign in the face of overwhelming odds. Zara bent close to his ear, her voice thick with tears but firm with conviction. "We're not letting you go. Not again. We just found you, and we're staying right here." The afternoon sun filtered through Zeena's bedroom window, casting a warm glow on her determined face. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, steady despite the emotional turmoil of seeing Elijah in the hospital bed. The image of his bruised body had shaken something loose inside her, not just fear, but a fierce resolve that burned like a pilot light in her chest. "One more time," she muttered, opening the corrupted audio file. Her eyes narrowed at the screen as she implemented a new decryption algorithm she'd developed. Lines of code scrolled past as she worked, her technical expertise flowing naturally after years of self-taught programming. Technology had always made sense to her, even when people didn't. The first attempt failed, the file remaining stubbornly scrambled. She adjusted the parameters and tried again, biting her lower lip. The second attempt crashed, making her computer screen freeze momentarily. Frustration bubbled up, but she pushed it down with a deep breath. The third attempt made the file stutter, then clear, like wiping fog from a mirror. Blake's voice suddenly filled her headphones, crystal clear. "I'm not covering for you anymore, Hunter." Zeena's breath caught. She turned up the volume, hands shaking slightly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Hunter's response came through with chilling clarity. "If you talk, I'll end you." The audio captured what followed in brutal detail. The sound of bodies colliding, furniture scraping across floor, Blake's desperate gasp for air. Then the sickening thud that had haunted Zeena's nightmares for months. The final silence felt heavier than any sound she'd ever heard. Her fingers trembled as she saved the file, triple-checking the backup copies. She couldn't risk losing this evidence, not after everything they'd been through. She attached it to an encrypted email and sent it to Franklin and Carmen with a short message. "Got it, full confession." Within minutes, her phone buzzed with responses. Franklin had already authenticated the audio and uploaded it to the federal case file. Carmen confirmed it was being distributed to major news outlets, her message punctuated with 3 exclamation points. Zeena opened a news site and watched as the story exploded across social media. Justice for the Mitchells began trending, climbing higher with each passing minute. Comments flooded in demanding Hunter's arrest. The truth they'd known all along was finally impossible to ignore or brush aside. She could hear Zara moving around in the next room, probably watching the same coverage. But Zeena stayed focused on her screen, monitoring the spread of the evidence she'd uncovered. Each share, each outraged response felt like another nail in Hunter's coffin, a small victory in their long battle for justice. After an hour of watching the story build momentum, Zeena closed her laptop with a decisive click. She sat back in her chair, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her shoulders finally relaxing. "We're ending this for good," she said to the quiet room, her words both a promise and a declaration of war. The federal courthouse loomed against the morning sky, its marble steps crowded with reporters and camera crews. Police barricades held back the surge of people, their voices creating a constant buzz of anticipation. News helicopters circled overhead, their rotors beating against the crisp autumn air like the heartbeat of a city waiting for justice. The crowd below shifted restlessly, some holding handmade signs demanding truth, others simply there to witness history unfold. Inside the packed courtroom, Judge Lorraine Desai's presence commanded immediate silence. Her steel-gray hair and sharp eyes reflected decades of judicial experience that had earned her a reputation for fairness and unwavering integrity. When Elijah Warren was wheeled in, bandages visible beneath his carefully pressed suit, a collective murmur rippled through the gallery. Despite his injuries, his eyes remained clear and focused, burning with determination that even his broken body couldn't diminish. Franklin Moore approached the bench with measured steps, his weathered face grave. The lines around his mouth deepened as he spoke. "Your Honor, we present Exhibit A, the complete audio recording from the Whitmore estate." The courtroom speakers crackled to life and Blake Whitmore's voice filled the space. "I'm not covering for you anymore, Hunter." The raw desperation in his tone made several jurors flinch, and one elderly woman in the back row pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. Carmen Liu followed, her presentation methodical and devastating. Her laser-focused delivery left no room for doubt as she outlined years of systematic corruption, suppressed witness statements, manipulated evidence logs, coordinated cover-ups reaching into the highest levels of Charleston law enforcement. Her voice never wavered as she connected the dots between Hunter Lockridge's family connections and Judge Knox's prejudiced rulings. With each revelation, the air in the courtroom grew heavier. Zara and Zeena sat in the front row, their hands clasped so tightly their knuckles showed white. Zara's eyes never left the judge's face, searching for any hint of their fate, while Zeena stared straight ahead, her jaw set in stubborn defiance. The weight of their ordeal showed in the shadows under their eyes and the tension in their shoulders. They looked both stronger and more fragile than they had months ago when this nightmare began. Judge Desai listened without interruption, taking occasional notes with a silver pen that caught the light. Her expression remained neutral as the evidence mounted. Financial records showing payoffs, text messages revealing coordination between corrupt officers, sworn statements from witnesses who had been threatened into silence. Not a muscle moved in her face, but her eyes grew increasingly troubled. When all evidence was presented, Judge Desai removed her reading glasses and surveyed the courtroom. The silence was absolute as she cleared her throat. Her voice carried clearly, "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, I hereby vacate all charges against Zara and Zeena Mitchell." She paused, letting the words settle like rain on parched earth. "Furthermore, I order an immediate criminal investigation into Hunter Lockridge, Officers James Peterson and Michael Torres, and Judge Carlton Knox for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and judicial misconduct." The controlled atmosphere of the courtroom shattered. Zara crumpled forward, her shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the very core of her being. Zeena caught her sister, their tears mixing as they clung to each other like survivors of a shipwreck finally reaching shore. Elijah wheeled himself toward them, his own eyes glistening with tears he'd held back for too long. In a moment that surprised everyone, especially herself, Zeena turned and threw her arms around him first, burying her face in his shoulder as years of pain and fear finally broke free in gut-wrenching sobs. The sounds of justice being served echoed through the high-ceilinged room. Tears, applause, the sharp rap of Judge Desai's gavel calling for order. But for the three people embracing in the front row, the noise faded away to nothing. They held on to each other, a family forged in fire, finally free from the chains of lies that had bound them for too long. The evening sun cast long shadows across Elijah's estate, as camera flashes lit up the front gates like lightning. Reporters crowded behind security barriers, their questions overlapping into an indecipherable roar. Zara and Zina stood on the front steps, their smiles practiced but hollow. Their matching blue dresses, hastily purchased for the press conference, felt stiff and foreign against their skin, the price tags barely removed and the fabric still creased from store shelves. Inside, the marble foyer echoed with ringing phones. House staff moved quietly, fielding calls from major networks, politicians, and book publishers, all hungry for exclusive rights to the twins' story. The twins slipped back through the heavy oak doors, their shoulders dropping as soon as they were out of view, both exhaling as if they'd been holding their breath the entire time. In the kitchen, Elijah's hands trembled slightly as he prepared 3 cups of chamomile tea. The bandages on his arms peeked out from beneath his rolled-up sleeves, a stark reminder of the bombing that had nearly taken him from them again. Steam rose from the delicate china cups as he arranged them on a silver tray, his movements careful and deliberate, as if focusing on this simple task could steady his nerves. "Girls," he called softly, "come sit with me." They settled into the plush chairs of the informal dining room, the tea untouched before them. Elijah's face was drawn, but his eyes were clear and determined. Deep lines etched around his mouth spoke of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. "I'm stepping down as Attorney General," he said simply. "The announcement goes out tomorrow morning." Zara's breath caught. Zina's fingers tightened around her teacup, the porcelain clinking softly against the saucer. "They'll say I was forced out," he continued, his voice steady. "Maybe I was, but I choose this. I choose you. I should have made that choice 18 years ago." The silence that followed felt heavy, complicated. Zara stared at her reflection in the tea, seeing the same lost expression she'd worn in the courthouse holding cell months ago. Zina traced the rim of her cup, her usual sharp tongue quiet, her defiance momentarily subdued by the weight of her father's sacrifice. They should feel triumphant. The verdict had been overturned, their names were cleared. Their father had chosen them over his career, but the victory felt hollow against the weight of 18 years of absence, of struggle, of being unseen. No press conference or public vindication could erase the nights they'd cried themselves to sleep, or the birthdays celebrated without him. The house staff moved discreetly around them, collecting ignored phone messages and closing curtains against the persistent camera flashes outside. The day's newspapers lay scattered across the kitchen counter, their headlines screaming about justice and redemption. But here, in this moment, 3 people sat with the raw reality that healing wouldn't come as easily as a judge's ruling. Zara turned to her sister, her voice barely above a whisper. "We should be happy. Why does it still hurt?" Zina didn't answer. She simply reached across the space between them and took her sister's hand, their fingers intertwining just as they had on countless nights when they only had each other. Their bond the only constant in a world that had failed them time and again. The study was dimly lit, heavy curtains drawn against the press cameras that still lingered outside the estate gates, a silent reminder of the world waiting beyond. Elijah sat in his leather chair, his bandaged hands resting on the polished mahogany desk. An untouched cup of tea sent wisps of steam into the silence, curling like ghosts of unspoken words. When the door creaked open, he didn't turn immediately. Zara entered first, her steps hesitant but determined, each footfall a testament to her inner resolve. Zina followed, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotion, eyes betraying the storm within. No cameras recorded this moment. No reporters waited to spin their words. The weight of truth hung heavy in the air between them, almost tangible. "Why didn't you fight harder back then?" Zina's voice cracked the silence, raw and accusing. "Why now? When we needed you most, when Mom needed you, you disappeared, and now you're here playing hero." Elijah didn't flinch at her words. He looked at his daughters, really looked at them, and let his carefully constructed walls crumble piece by piece. "I was a coward," he said softly, his voice a mixture of regret and sorrow. When the threats came, when they firebombed my apartment, I told myself I was protecting my career, protecting the chance to make real change someday. But I was just scared. His voice thickened with emotion. I let fear win. I convinced myself your mother would be safer without me. I never knew about you two. But that's no excuse. Tears slid down Zara's cheeks as she listened, her heart aching with the weight of his confession. Even Zena's hard expression began to crack, her defenses slowly crumbling. I won't ask for forgiveness, Elijah continued, his eyes pleading. I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for a chance. Not to make it right, I can't, but to be here now, to be your father, if you'll let me. The silence stretched between them, heavy and profound. Zara's shoulders shook with quiet sobs, the pain of the past finally finding an outlet. Zena stood rigid, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide now visible. We spent so long hating you, Zena whispered, her voice barely audible. It was easier than missing you. I know, Elijah said simply, the weight of his acknowledgement settling over them. Zena took a shuddering breath, her voice coming out small, vulnerable, stripped of its usual armor. Okay, Dad. The word hung in the air like a bridge between past and future, fragile yet full of promise. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. Zara stepped forward first, then Zena. They came together in a tight embrace, no words needed. Years of pain and longing melted into something new, fragile but real. They held each other for a long time, these three broken pieces finally fitting together. In the quiet of the study, they were just a father and his daughters, finding their way home. The bright studio lights illuminated Zara and Zena Mitchell as they sat poised on the plush interview couch. Their matching cream blazers and carefully styled hair reflected months of transformation from prison uniforms to polished survivors. The makeup artist had spent extra time covering the faint shadows under their eyes, remnants of sleepless nights preparing for this moment. The host, Sarah Chen, leaned forward with genuine warmth in her eyes. Welcome to Morning America Today, Sarah began softly, her voice carrying the perfect blend of professionalism and compassion. You've been through an extraordinary journey. How does it feel to finally share your story on your own terms? Zena's hand found Zara's, their fingers intertwining naturally, a gesture they'd perfected since childhood. It feels like breathing again, Zara answered, her voice steady and clear despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. For so long, we were just case numbers, mugshots, headlines. But we're so much more than what happened to us. We're daughters, sisters, friends. We're whole people. We survived, Zena added, her usual sharp edges softened but still present, like a blade wrapped in silk. Not just the trial or the death sentence. We survived years of being invisible, of having our truth ignored, of being told our lives didn't matter. The studio audience sat transfixed as the twins shared carefully chosen pieces of their story. They spoke of their mother's strength, of cleaning houses to make ends meet, of holding each other through endless dark nights. They mentioned small victories and unexpected kindnesses, but they never dwelled on the trauma or pain. That wasn't the story they wanted to tell today. What would you say to young girls out there who feel powerless, whose voices aren't being heard? Sarah asked, genuine emotion making her voice catch as she leaned closer. Zara leaned forward, her eyes intense and direct into the camera, as if she could see each person watching at home. We were meant to die, but instead, we rose. The studio fell completely silent, not even a cough or rustle of movement. Your voice matters, your truth matters, and no one can take that from you unless you let them. Find your strength, even when it seems impossible. The audience erupted in applause, some rising to their feet. Sarah dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, not bothering to hide her reaction. Zena squeezed her sister's hand tighter, a silent message of pride passing between them. You're not just survivors anymore, Sarah observed when the applause finally died down. You've become symbols of hope. "We don't want to be symbols," Xena said firmly, her chin lifting slightly. "We want to be bridges, to show other girls they can fight back. That justice is possible, even when the system is stacked against you." Behind the cameras, hidden from public view, Elijah Warren stood watching the monitor. His bandages were gone now, though some scars remained, physical reminders of battles fought and won. In his hands, he held a silver frame containing a photo of Naomi Mitchell, young, beautiful, fierce. Her eyes seemed to shine with pride at her daughters, the same determined spark visible in the twins on screen. He looked up at the monitor where Zara and Xena continued speaking with grace and power, their voices no longer silenced. Tears misted his eyes as a smile spread across his face. They had all risen from the ashes of the past, stronger together than they ever were apart, forging a new path forward. If you enjoyed the story of Elijah, I hand-picked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.